Good day to you this 4th of July Independence Day, and we are going to do another film reaction. And today we are looking at another movie from my high school years. As I said, been doing in these last few videos, that's been pretty well the theme, is that I am focusing on those high school years. And so the movie that we're looking at, it's not so the first couple movies, the first one we did was Men in Black that came out the summer before my freshman year. Excuse me. And then the second video, we looked at Scream 2 and I Know What You Did Last Summer, both movies that came out my freshman year during high school, the first half. Now, normally I would have moved on to the big monster blockbuster that came out that freshman year, but because it's 4th of July, it's Independence Day, I think it was good to jump forward a little bit to the year 2000. It was the summer of 2000 that this movie, The Patriot, came out. Excuse me. So this would be the summer before my senior year of high school. And this is actually going to be one of those that's going to be kind of interesting to examine, because the movie is reviewing The Patriot is, well, to just put it plainly, it is complicated. Because you're looking at, on the one hand, you're looking at the movie itself. How is it as a movie, and the themes that are presented in its script and in its story and things like that. You're looking at that. But you also have to be mindful of the themes, but of the historicity of it. And I'm going to tell you that historically, The Patriot is very poor. And in terms of historical accuracy, it's on a scale of 1 to 10, it's probably like a 2 or a 3. Right? So it is really, really bad historically. And some of the historical things that happen in this movie they're very dramatic on film, but and leave an impact, but because you're talking about historical events, they do kind of run the risk of kind of being a bit of a bearing false witness situation, Eighth Commandment thing. And so we'll kind of get to that in a little bit. But before we do, we are going to, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into the story of the movie. We're going to look at the characters. We're going to look at the two main characters. So the first main character are these two guys. This guy, Benjamin Martin. On the right side, you see a person named Francis Marion. And so Francis Marion is an actual historical individual. Benjamin Martin is not. Benjamin Martin is a composite of him as well as some other American Revolution figures. Now, one of the things that seems to have been a trend in the 90s, the late 90s, early 2000s, when it comes to historical movies, is what they would do is they would create this, they go into this historical event, and then they create characters who are somewhat of a combination or whatever of real life people. So the first movie you saw this with was the Titanic. Now maybe there's other movies, but the first one that stands in my mind is Titanic, which is that mega blockbuster that eventually I am going to get to. Titanic, the Titanic sinking and all that is a historical, actual event, but the main characters that we see in the movie are not historical characters. And so, I mean, there are some historical characters that are in the movie, but for the most part, the characters are fictional. The same thing held true when you got to, the same thing holds true here with The Patriot. And then you're going to get to it again, this kind of plot thing when you get to the movie Pearl Harbor, and that's where it really, really, really bombs out, and it becomes very, very problematic. But in fact, Pearl Harbor would come out about actually the following summer. And so that's an example of where the direction of these uh, historical twistings get to. And so it's, I think what the film directors, the film writers are doing is they're trying to take a safe trip. And they're thinking probably, well, if we make a fictional version of this person, if we do any historical inaccuracies or whatever, then we are off the hook because, well, we weren't talking about that person. Which, for the most part, that does work here in The Patriot. It definitely worked okay in Titanic. Doesn't work in Pearl Harbor. But it definitely kind of worked to some degree, and I'm going to get to it a little bit where it doesn't. Here, with the Benjamin Martin character, it worked. And I think by Benjamin Martin not being an actual person, but based off a real person, they could kind of play with some historical events, some of the things that happened in World War II, or not World War II, the American Revolution. And so they're able to and they're also they were able to give you that feeling. So there is this scene early in the movie where Benjamin Martin, Mel Gibson, his character, they're in Charlestown, South Carolina, and they are discussing, they're debating whether or not to declare independence. And so they're having this discussion and talking about whether or not to go to war. And in the end, Benjamin Martin makes this line. He tells him what the war is going to be. It's going to be in front of your family. It's going to be amongst brothers. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. He gives this warning of how horrible the situation is going to be. And the thing is that was actually accurate. And they play that out pretty well in this movie. There's a scene, and I watched the extended version, which I didn't know existed, but I found it on Amazon Prime, and so it was only $3. No, $4. Whatever. It wasn't a lot of money, so I'm like, might as well throw in the extra change, throw in the change, watch it. I don't think it adds a whole lot to the movie, but it does add a little bit here and there. And one of them is there's early on in the movie, there's this point where a horse gets away, and the kids are trying to run down and catch the horse, and that's when they get to a river, and there they see in the river these floating bodies of soldiers, and it's later that evening they start seeing the shots going off in the trees out in front of them. And the fighting gets closer and closer and closer to this house. And I like that scene. I do. I think that's a great scene because it does get you into them. And this is one of those freedoms that they can have by picking a fictional character. Did Francis Marion witness this while deciding whether or not he'd go to war? And we don't really know that. I don't know if we know that or not. Somebody that's more knowledgeable on this may be able to answer me on that. But either way, but I'm thinking with it being a fictional character, in the case that Francis Marion never experienced it, that gives them freedom. And it is a scene of value. It gets you into the mindset. It gets you as the audience to empathize with those who experienced it. And the fact was that it was between friends. And this kind of gets captured with the inclusion of a certain character. This kind of gets captured in Adam Baldwin's character, Captain. What is it? I got to look at it again. Captain Wilkins. And so Captain Wilkins was a person who, so he was a traitor. He betrayed his own people, and he throws this torch. And we're going to get to that scene, and that is an extremely problematic scene. And it's one of those scenes that's disturbing, it's horrifying, and we'll get to why it's a problem and it's a weakness in the movie. But anyways, either way, that did capture that reality that it is neighbors against neighbors. And this is the tough part, the difficult part of an American Revolution. We in this country, in current days, we are very divided. We are fighting about anything and everything we can. Just go through your social media feed, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever, and you see such division and such vitriol towards one another. And fortunately, it's just, for the most part, words, but there has been violence. We've seen it in the last year or so. And when you start turning and attacking your neighbor, and maybe that's why we could do it. See, back then they didn't communicate with each other with social media. They didn't communicate with each other. They actually talked to each other. They had to. Communication was much different than it is now, and so you see it that they actually do have difficulties attacking one another. There's a part with Cornwallis when he's getting mad at Tavington, and Tavington is kind of the bad guy of the movie, and he's getting upset with him. He says we're gonna eventually live with these people again. We're gonna make commerce with them again. We have to conduct as gentlemen, and this is capturing the reality, the brutality of this war, the war that it was. In any war, and especially when you're talking about American Revolution, a revolution, is it's going to be between friends, between neighbors, and between even family possibly, and it captures that difficulty to go through this. And I thought that was they capture some of these themes, and so Benjamin Martin and the Francis Marion and other thing. And from what I've seen is they do a pretty good, from what I've just quick glance researching, apparently they did pretty decent in capturing this. There were some people in British media that were upset with the portrayal of Benjamin Martin, and they said, well, he looks like he's too much of a hero. And I don't think they ever did, and it's actually portrayed frequently that he wasn't, that he was definitely flawed. He has anger issues, and we're going to get to that later. So that's the first character that we have to deal with. Now here's the other one. This is the one that has the bigger historical problems, and that is William Tavington and Banastre Tarleton. So Banastre Tarleton is the real person. William Tavington is the character in the movie, portrayed by Jason Isaacs, who, in my opinion, Jason Isaacs is just so good at being a villain. We see this especially with his character of Lucius Malfoy in the Harry Potter films. He's just a very good bad guy. But here's the thing, is William Tavington, he's based off of this man named Banastre Tarleton, who was called the Butcher in the war. And actually, in the extended cut, William Tavington is referred to as the Butcher because of these horrible things that he was doing, and you see it in the movie. I mean, he shot a child, he was hanging women, things like that. He was doing some very brutal and horrible things. And so he's supposed to be kind of a fictionalized version of Tarleton. But the thing is that history has found that Tarleton wasn't quite as brutal as people thought. In fact, the Butcher moniker was possibly propaganda to get people to jump into the war. And so, to make the British look worse than they were. So this is kind of where it gets complicated. So the burning of the church scene, this was kind of the chief of it. There is brutalities that the British carried out in wars, but from the looks of it, it was kind of limited as to brutality within the American Revolution. It wasn't as bad as it's made out to be in this movie. And so, like I said, in the height of this was the church burning scene. They pretty much put the entire town into this church, lock them in, and burn them. Now this is an atrocious thing. The character Willem Tavington, he says to the man who set it on fire, and he said to him, "Well, basically this will be forgotten. It's the outcome that matters. It's classic. The end justifies the means. Utilitarian philosophy, and the problem with that scene, as it is just disturbing, it's so difficult to watch it. But the challenge with the scene is that there is no record of anything like this ever happening in the Revolution. And someone made the point that if that had happened, there are some people that wonder if we as Americans could have ever had a relationship with England again. Somebody made some, and so the fact that we as a country generally have kind of this relationship with England still probably is probably somewhat as evidence that the brutality was not nearly what it was. So this whole thing of the church burning, and not to mention it would have been, I mean, the number of people that were in that church, and just the idea of burning a church. You're talking about the British who were religious. The colonists and the British were very religious, and to find to burn a church would be absolutely atrocious, even from the standpoints of the British. And so, like I said, so this is kind of an issue with the movie, and the brutality is a very big talking point and teaching point. And there's a lot, and so as I've been doing my research, after watching the movie, is a lot of people are baffled on this. Why did they do this? What was the reason for over dramatizing it? Why not just stick with what you had? Show the bravery of people standing up, fighting for the cause of freedom. Why portray the brutality so much worse than it really was? Especially since the guy that's directing it is not American. It was a German director. So why would a German director write this? And so there's questions: what is his motives for writing it the way he did? So, So that's the two biggest. Those are the big challenges when dealing with this movie. Is the historical accuracies are pretty bad. So I'm going to focus on a couple themes as well here before I get a little bit farther into the movie. Before I really get to the review portion of proceedings, I'm going to look at a theme. At the very opening scene of the movie, there's this quote from Benjamin Martin. He says, "I have long feared that my sins would return to visit me, and the cost is more than I can bear." Now, what's the sins that he committed? Sins of inaction? There's a little bit of truth to that. His inaction could definitely make a case that was what led to the death of his son Thomas. So there's that. But I was much more likely it's the sins of his temperament. Because you see what happens when Thomas is killed, is murdered by Tavington. The immediate thing that Benjamin Martin does is he plots out. He goes to rescue his son, which, okay, good idea, good thing. So he rescues his son from this army. And then there's this man who's trying to get away. And what does Benjamin Martin do? He chases him down. He throws an axe into his back, and he just slices him and dices him and chops and chops and chops. And he is, making a bloody mess long past this man's death. I mean, it was just absolute brutality. This is anger. This is frustration over the loss of his child. And even frustration with himself because his inaction probably made it happen. Well, again, that is a sin of anger. This would revisit later in the film when that church was set on fire. Gabriel, played um, by Heath Ledger. Sorry, so Gabriel, played by Heath Ledger, uh, it was his wife. His wife was in that church. She was burned to death. She died, along with this town. And so in anger, he rode and he charged after Tavington's army, and he got a shot off on him. And actually, it looked like a pretty good one. And he could have gone for the kill and gone for an easy kill, done and over with. But he didn't. He got down. He got that little itty bitty blade. Why? Because the sins of his father had visited him. He was a little bit too much like his father. He fed his anger. And this was a conversation that they just had the night before. When they were at the Spanish mission at the swamp or whatever. They're sitting there and they're talking with one another. And he talks about how their anger would get them into trouble, and that's what is happening. That sin is visiting. And when he had the chance for the kill, he could have easily taken care of it, done, over with. But instead, he had that dagger. And that's why he ended up dead. Which gave time for Tavington to turn around and get the kill. This is that quote playing out. And this is one of those points where you get a little bit of a theological point, a biblical point, the thing of original sin. Let's pull up the catechism. Let's actually pull this up. So you can see that up on the screen here. This is in the small catechism. Look at specifically the close of the commandments. It says here, what does God say about all these commandments? He says, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. So in other words, what we are dealing with here is original sin. The sinful nature, the sinfulness that runs through you will pass on to your children. This is the hard reality of sin. And that's what you see in what happens between Benjamin and the fate of Gabriel. Gabriel's fate is a consequence of his anger. The same anger that runs through his father, Benjamin. And so this is one of those themes that comes into the movie. Another theme that comes into the movie is the theme of sacrifice. And there's this ongoing theme of, what are you willing to give up for this freedom? What are you willing to do? Are you merely going to stop at words, as they said in the church? And so I go to this quote. This is a quote by Martin Luther King that I've always been fond of. It said, if a man hasn't discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live. So this is a quote by Martin Luther King, and I've always, like I said, been very fond. I've loved this quote. Martin Luther King was, of course, a man that embodied that. He did find something that he was willing to die for, and he did die for that cause. The cause of equality between the races. Now, was there success? Was there achievement? Yes, but we still got ways to go. But this is the thing: is going to the American Revolution. these people were finding something they're willing to die for, and that was freedom, political freedom, the taxation with representation, um, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom to assemble, all those good things that we so cherish as a nation. That is ultimately what Independence Day is all about. Independence Day is all about that document. It's about the document of the Declaration of Independence. It's about the freedoms, the ideas that are contained in it. And we are celebrating those who did defend it and those who still defend it. But we remember it begins with the document. And we, as the people, are supposed to stand for it, to defend it, to fight for it, and to share in it. So the movie, I don't know if I covered everything because there's a few other thoughts probably that I had in the movie watching it that are worthy of discussion. But ultimately, the movie does have some good themes. There's points where I think that's kind of well written. I kind of like those things where, like for example, Cornwallis even telling Tavington that you created this ghost, which is true. Benjamin Martin was called the ghost, so he was created because of the brutality. But even there, as I talk about that writing, if we're just talking about a movie that's just a movie for movie's sakes, then that's a good writing, But because we're talking about historical event, it complicates things. Mel Gibson, I think, put on a really good performance. I think Mel Gibson, he did very well. The scene when Gabriel dies, you just watch that emotion, that raw emotion. He's good at being likable, good at humor, and so very well done performance. And I do have to give credit to the director. He knows that people have seen the movie Braveheart, all right? And that was a great movie that starred Mel Gibson. And so there is, at the end of the movie, he kind of plays on that memory. And so credit to there. The score, the soundtrack by John Williams is absolutely amazing. It is pretty much it's almost like a soundtrack for 4th of July, for Independence Day. Wonderful, wonderful soundtrack. And like I said, and their cinematography is beautiful. I mean, you even see it right there on the poster. I mean, come on, mouse. All right, so see this shot. It was such a beautiful shot where he's riding up with the flag on the horse, and you hear you hear that wonderful John Williams score, and it's so wonderfully directed. And so there's these positives, there's these really good things in the movie, but you have the historical problems, specifically the problems revolving around the character of Tavington. And I thought this would actually, going back to the Tavington thing, I want to read where the historical dilemma happened. So the problem of Tarleton, who Tavington is loosely based off of, and I had to get, admittedly I'm doing kind of, $1 level research. Someone's probably done way better research on it than me, than I did. But just from looks of it, basically there was a time when Tarleton was believed to be this brutal person. And part of the reason was because of propaganda that was spread to encourage people to fight and keep people strong after the war, courageous and supportive of the cause. It was a form of manipulation, a little bit. Just as we do in this day and age. That still happens. But a couple of years after the Patriot came out. So to the credit to the Patriot, they didn't know this. The writings, the documents came out in 2002. Patriot was released in 2000, but there was documentation to find that did finally find that the character of Tarleton was not accurate. That the whole brutality stemmed from a single incident where something happened with where his horse got shot or something like that, and it caused chaos on the battlefield. And the whole circumstances around it is what kind of led to him being marked as this brutal butcher person because of this single incident, which was the consequence of bad circumstances. And so it turned out that he was actually a much more noble soldier than we get portrayed by the Tavington version in the movie The Patriot. So again, we got this historical inaccuracy. And I mean, I can handle the problems. So talking about the quality of the movie, I could handle the Francis Marion, the Benjamin Martin thing because those don't seem to be as problematic. This, however, was. The William Tavington is. This part because it does smear an actual historical person and it does smear the British. It gives us a bad impression about them. And so that is where the struggle is with trying to review this movie. What do you give it? How many? If on a 5-star scale, what do you give this movie? And I don't know. I really don't know what to give it. 'Cause I don't want to give it a 1-star because it was definitely better than that. But I don't want to give it 5 stars because of that historical issues. And I think I'm going to go right down the middle. I'd say it's a 3-star movie. I can't take away the cinematic quality from it because it's definitely there. The writing, that there is good writing here and there, and it does at times get you into the mindset of what it might have been like during that time. And I mean, you even have that beginning where there's this hesitancy for him to go to war. Why is he hesitant? Because he's seen war. And he's been one that's done horrible, horrible things. His kids are zealous. They hear the ideas of freedom and they want to fight. They don't understand. Gabriel was bold to go straight to war. It's after he'd been there that his hesitancy, he's going out of loyalty as a sense of duty for this. So he actually, I think at the beginning of the movie, it's almost like he was going there for a war to some degree. Like war felt like the glory of war, but by the end of the movie, it was more like that he was actually fighting for that cause. That he had that flag that he carried around and he was sewing up, and that's the one that he's riding into battle carrying. So like I said, it's got its strengths. It definitely does, but historical problems can't be ignored. So that's what I have. One thing that I was kind of curious about, I don't know if anybody's ever if you've seen this, if you've ever given thought to it. There is a little thing at the beginning of the movie where Benjamin Martin's working on a chair, on a rocking chair, and it just doesn't work for him. And then later in the movie, he visits General Cornwallis, and he sees a well done rocky chair, and he's looking at it, and so kind of plays a little bit of a theme in it. I don't know if there's anything significant to that, to the theme of the movies. Is there any message tied to it, or is it just kind of a little fun side thing that they wanted to include in the movie to show, give empathy, so you see that he's not just a person of war, that he has these hobbies. And maybe it is that. I don't know. So, if you know, let me know. If you don't, you don't. That's okay as well. So there we go. We end with the Patriot. So blessing on your 4th of July, what is left of it. I hope you enjoy some fireworks. I'm going to do myself. So God bless. In Jesus' name. Amen.